Hello everyone, and welcome to the 20th part of the Q&A in the context of the lecture series True Dhamma Following the Footsteps of the Buddha. With me is Saif, and today we will answer a few more of your questions. And in case you have any follow-ups or any additional questions, feel free to contact us either in the YouTube comment section or preferably on the Discord server, on the Dhamma Hub Discord server, because we most of the time read that daily. But without further ado, let us just start with the first question for today, which is, could you explain the possibly physical mechanism that allows karma to persist between lives? Do you want to start or should I?
I can give it a go to start with.
Sure, go ahead.
It's kind of a bit difficult to talk about, I feel like, because it's can be an abstract topic and kind of takes you away from the most immediate practice. But I mean, in general, with rebirth, most misinterpretations come from assuming that rebirth happens by there being sort of like one life here, and then there's like another life over here, and then there needs to be some sort of transference between the two to have some sort of connection. But if you look at the suttas, like especially when the Buddha defines the five aggregates, he doesn't like define it like the five aggregates as sort of this one life, like there's one five aggregates here, and then there's a new five aggregates when you're reborn. When he defines the aggregates, it says like the body aggregate, for example, is just any body whatsoever, whether it's far, near, future, inferior, superior, whatever body is, that's what counts as the body aggregate. And so you realize that like the five aggregates, it's more at that level of the sort of universal nature of experience. And so you realize then when you're reborn, there is no like one life here or one life here. It's all contained within the five aggregates and their universal nature. So there doesn't need to be any transference between the two because it's always just right where you are. And in fact, then the physical aspect kind of comes secondary to the karma. That's why like the Buddha describes the body as all karma. So that's basically how that works. And the only reason one would assume then that it's like this life and then this life is basically because the starting point is that we live completely absorbed in the particularity of our lives through sensuality, through basically attached to the joys and griefs of the world and senses. And you assume this particular setup to be yourself. So that basically outlines to you what the direction of the practice is, which is to withdraw more and more from being absorbed in the particular and towards like starting to see that universal nature of your experience through that's what mindfulness is, basically having that frame of reference at all time about the general nature of body being present, regardless of whether what I'm feeling now, what I'm feeling tomorrow, wherever it is, it's on the general background of the all-pervasiveness of the body. And the more you develop that, the more you will see it at the level we're talking about, where it not only counts for this life, but as you develop that perception of the body as a pervasive background, you realize that pervasive background stretches across lives. That's why like mindfulness and concentration, it naturally leads to seeing rebirth, seeing how karma works, and so on, which is obviously like for how mindfulness and concentration is often taught today, where it's more the level of concentrating in front of you towards specific objects and so on. I mean, you can't really see how it would lead to knowledge of rebirth and so on in the same way as this knowledge of mindfulness, basically, of this universal framework. So, yeah, I guess that's the practical aspect of it, how you should be developing yourself towards this wider standpoint.
Yeah, I guess it's mainly the missing perspective on your own experience that is leading you away from understanding. the mechanisms behind rebirth and everything else. So as soon as you develop that and detach further and further from the particular aspects of your experience, the more that aspect, the more general aspect becomes available, which is something that you can develop, but not have to develop. It happens, at least as I understand it, it happens quite often that a person just loses interest in pursuing such things upon attaining the right view, as an example, simply because you are no longer pressured by such questions. And as I understand, such questions most of the time are motivated by desire in some way or another. So it's not very helpful to ask those things. It's usually much better to put those questions aside and instead just focus on the instruction part and on the actual training, and not so much on the metaphysical aspects or anything like that. So yeah, karma is a thing, and the Buddha talked about that, but how is that relevant to your practice right here and now? Is it just a pressing concern that you have, something that you must have answered because you are suffering to a degree? Or is it something that is truly beneficial to you right now? But yeah. In most cases, I would say that it's better to put such questions aside and just focus on the basics and virtue, on restraint and all those things.
Yeah, because even if you want to develop it, it comes through that virtue and sensory anyways. Like, you're never going to get any confirmation or any satisfaction just through like view pondering about it. So even the things that we're saying about like developing this general background, like, unless you're already developed in that way, it's just a view right now, right? If you want that to have any sort of relevance, it has to be developed, and then you will start to see it very directly in your experience that, oh yes, this general container of the body is always there. It doesn't matter if it's this life or the next life or the previous life. That's why the Buddha says that, like, if you do develop knowledge of past lives, all you recollect is just these 5 aggregates. So knowledge of the 5 aggregates is what you need fundamentally.
And that is kind of the important part. Such questions, on the worldly level, such questions do not have a satisfying answer. The only satisfying answer that you can get is by practicing and then seeing and knowing for yourself. That is the only way in which such questions can be answered without you leaping out to the very next thing that you do not deem agreeable about whatever metaphysical model you have developed. But yeah. Anyway, I think that might be enough for that question. Let us move on to the next one. And the next person wants to know a very simple question. Do you have a favorite sutta? That's a very difficult question. I do have suttas as an example that I prefer, and I'm sure that Saif and every other person has such suttas too. And those are usually the suttas that helped the most when it comes to practice, or that, for example, I see value in teaching in. When I look at a lot of people that usually ask us questions, then I see problems and misunderstandings that occur over and over. And when I see suttas that answer those questions, then I see value in them, and I find them agreeable in that regard. And yeah, when it comes to suttas that I personally like, I like the 2 Arrows Sutta when it comes to suffering. That one I found very, very helpful when it comes to the detached mode of being that you start experiencing from a certain point onwards. That was, actually, that was the most helpful sutta for me at some point. And the beginning of the Satipatthana Sutta, just the initial parts of the sequence, were also very helpful for me in my personal development. And I liked them very much, simply for the development of mindfulness and for understanding what mindfulness even means. Apart from that, there are many suttas from the Majjhima Nikaya that I like a lot, because basically all of them are great as I understand them. And they portray the training in the right depths for most people nowadays, I would say. So yeah, what's your favorite sutta?
Yeah, like you say, it's quite hard to answer, especially because I think over time as well, like, your favorites start to change depending on sort of what aspect you're focusing on at a specific time. So, like, if you ask me next week, I'd probably give a different answer. Like, right now, I quite like I can't remember where it is in the Nikaya exactly, but it's the sutta where they compare purifying the mind to purifying gold. And it sort of outlines it in this gradual way of like first developing wholesome conduct by body, speech, mind, then abandoning sensual thoughts, and then also it goes into some more subtle phenomena like abandoning these thoughts of, do other people despise me? What do they think of me, and so on? Which are, according to that sutta, the more subtle thoughts that appear even after like sensual thoughts and aversion thoughts are faded. And then even after that, it even says that, even after you have gone rid of those subtle thoughts, even then the mind's still not concentrated. So it goes quite in a lot of detail of how to get a concentrated mind and what concentrated mind actually is. So there's that one I really like. I really like the Salt Crystal Sutta, I think it's called, which is about how karma affects one differently, depending on the development of one's mind, which is super important for the practice. Yeah, the things that affect you, that happen to you, don't really matter so much as the mind's development and the mind's non-clarity, and that puts it into the relevance of that really into light. And it shows that as well, even doesn't matter what you've done in the past, there's always sort of recovery there. Because even if you're like a murderer, like Angulimala was, and you do have that karma, and you can't avoid that karma, if you develop your mind, then even when people were getting revenge on him, then the karma didn't affect him in the same way. So I think that's a really nice sutra as well. But again, it's difficult to answer, right? Because there are so many good ones. And I would recommend reading them all, especially like smaller ones as well, where little details about the practice, about the order of practice, for example, there might be small sutras about that in Anguttara Nikaya or Samyutta Nikaya. They really point to perspective everything about the path, basically.
Yeah, that's interesting, especially when it comes to concentration and how the Buddha laid it out. There are many good suttas on that. And when you read them with an open mind and with trying to understand them, then he usually displays concentration as a last part of the practice, where everything culminates towards. Whereas nowadays, it's often portrayed as a method of getting there, so to speak. And if any person who is of that view would read such a sutta, then they cannot really make sense of it. So you have to give up that prior view to understand concentration in that new way, so to speak.
Yeah. Even things as simple as like practicing satipatthanas. Not only does the Buddha say that you have to develop virtue beforehand, but even like subtle things, like he says it's literally impossible to contemplate it without having abandoned sort of lust towards activity, lust towards company, and lust towards sleep, those types of things. And that's kind of the opposite of how a lot of people, when you get introduced to the practice, it kind of just goes straight into practicing 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is, at least in the suttas, it's sort of the wrong way to go about it. It's not a way that would necessarily lead to cessation of suffering, because the conditions aren't really there.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing. The order is usually what is mixed up, as I understand it. People usually get cues from the suttas and try to practice what is in there, but when the foundation is missing, then whatever you do will not lead to the desired results. The joy you experience is not the joy the Buddha is talking about. The tranquility is very likely not the tranquility that the Buddha was talking about, etc. It has to happen in a certain order, and without that foundation, Anyway, I think in summary, there are suttas that are relevant right now, and those are usually the suttas that we like. And then there are suttas that are relevant to other people that we talk to. Those are also nice, but it changes by the day, or at least by the week, or by the month. Yeah. Okay, I guess it's enough for that question. Let us move to the next one. And the next question is believing in rebirth necessary to practice properly? Another question on rebirth for you, Saif.
No, basically. Some people might look at the mundane right view and see that is in the mundane right view, it says, there is afterlife and so on, but it's more the level of not believing that there is no afterlife. Otherwise, like, for the practice, you would sort of have to hallucinate things that you're not necessarily seeing right now. And that would really go against all the suttas where the Buddha talks about how it's directly verifiable here and now, how you shouldn't go by just tradition, by what the teacher says. It needs to be part of your direct experience of what is wholesome. And also go against those wages that the Buddha gives, where it says, you don't have to believe in rebirth, but you should think, like, if there is one, then acting wholesomely will be good. If there isn't one, acting wholesomely is still good. Or even in the, I can't remember which Dighanakaya Sutta is on rebirth. I think it might be 22. But I think in that one, where it's sort of refuting all the wrong ideas about the afterlife, the person that sutta doesn't even end up with the viewpoint that there is afterlife. All he has done is refuted his own ideas that he has any certainty that there is no afterlife. And that's sort of the main thing that you want to do in your practice, because the viewpoint that there is no afterlife is a sense of certainty in your experience that you don't really have. So, even if there's all this suffering in your life, and even if you do all the evil actions possible in your life, if you have this idea that there is no afterlife and that, death, everything finishes, you do always have this sort of back door in your experience where everything is sort of neutralized at the end. And that really goes against what the mundane right view is, which is about believing in the consequences of your actions. If you believe that everything is neutralized at death, then you don't really believe that your actions have consequences in the same way as someone who thinks that, I will experience the fruit of my actions at some point. And yeah, it's part of a nature, really, realizing that there is no certainty in your experience, that there is, your senses have arisen of their own accord. You never had any choice in them in the first place. So what choice do you have, really, in both its cessation and what happens to it at cessation? So contemplating like that can be useful. But having this strict viewpoint that there is rebirth is unnecessary. Like, it's probably going to be interpreted with wrong view anyways, because you don't have right view, and so you're probably going to interpret it through the lens of self. And then you holding on to your view about what rebirth is going to be you holding on to your viewpoint of self, ultimately. So no, you don't need it, especially because the right view, which is about dependent origination, all you need to do is see your actual current experience, the nature of the body, as a sort of something that's undermining your experience, something that's not in your control, something that's undermining your sense of control. That's kind of, it's all that's necessary.
You need surprisingly little. You actually don't need really any background knowledge about Buddhism. That one thing, the understanding of dependent origination, really is enough. So you would be surprised, or could be surprised, by the amount of knowledge that some people in the Suttas that understood the Dhamma had. Basically nothing. And that is enough. You don't need much. Ajahn Chah also says that quite often. You just need patient endurance and the understanding of anicca, so to speak. And that is all it takes, really. So yeah, it's absolutely not necessary to have that belief, but you should not cling to any of those views, because that is kind of a hindrance. Either over-affirming rebirth or under-affirming rebirth. That is usually problematic. But simply admitting that you do not know and cannot know for certain, that is usually a good way to go about things. And one thing that I often encounter is also that people think of rebirth as, how does someone say, I call that an immortality project, that people in Buddhism try to make it about being there forever or something like that. And that kind of misses the point of Buddhism, at least as the Buddha taught it. He would try to escape the entire circle of rebirth and not to try to make himself immortal or something like that. So yeah, that is also something that should be avoided. And that is usually what many people interpret Buddhism like in the West, at least where I live. They think about, I can be reborn, and this is not the only life, which is great. So that is one of the most common views that I encounter, seeing it as another life in a video game or something. Yeah. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, even though we're saying it's not necessary, it doesn't necessarily mean that like rebirth is like an irrelevant doctrine or something. Um, but like unless you're going to be developing divine eye, like the how you come to knowledge of like birth and rebirth applying to you is through dependent origination, anyways. It's through understanding like this is the condition for birth, and when you've understood dependent origination, when you've gone rid of ignorance, you will also understand that I have gotten rid of the condition of birth. And you will also realize then that if I had not gotten rid of the condition, then birth would have still applied to me, even if the specific appearance of this specific body was to pass away, like the condition of birth was still there. So, like, you can't become an arahant without like sort of understanding rebirth as how it applies, but you understand it through understanding your current experience. So it always comes back to dependent origination, anyways.
Yeah. At some point in practice, likely after you have attained the right view, you literally have no reason anymore to deny rebirth or think of it as any, I don't know, intellectual game or mechanism that people back then used to keep people in check or anything like that. You kind of can just accept it as a thing. And that's rather beneficial. So when someone has a very strong opinion on rebirth and not being a thing or something like that, or being completely irrelevant, that it's usually not so good. But yeah. Anyway, enough on that question. Should we move to the next one?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a bit longer. The question is, what is your opinion on Gnostics and German Meister Eckhart in relation to Buddhism? Both are Christian in faith and hold similar views to non-self and non-duality. I must say that I have limited knowledge on Meister Eckhart. I know who he was, and I know somewhat how he practiced. I know that some of the jhana descriptions or some of the concentration descriptions that he gave can sound very similar to the jhanas that the Buddha laid out. And it might even be possible that he practiced those very jhanas. I cannot know. But what those descriptions are usually missing is simply the understanding of dependent origination. They lack wisdom. They lack direct understanding. So no matter what they attained, people can be very virtuous. There's no denying that. People can, and the Buddha said so, understand the drawback of sensuality and do not engage in any activities of body, speech, and mind as far as they can. That goes against that leads toward sense objects. And as soon as you start withdrawing and detaching, there can be many experiences that you can interpret in various different ways, depending on your background, if you miss that right view. So the chief difference, as I understand it, is just the lack of understanding, the lack of the Four Noble Truths. But Saif knows much more on that topic, so he can give you a rundown.
We're not done much more. I feel like you specifically, what you said was pretty much the crux of it, is that yeah, it lacks right view, it lacks dependent origination. And that's why, like, even for doctrines that make quite sharp distinction between like the particularity of the world and then the absolute, the universal, the unconditioned, usually there are always like wrong views in regards to it. Like, for example, the world coming out of the unconditioned and so on, which is common to the Gnostics and to Meister Eckhart. That sort of Neoplatonic idea that there's this transcendent one and then the world sort of boils over from it. Those sorts of things would be impossible to maintain if you had right view, if you understood dependent origination. Like if you look at Majjhima Nikaya 1, all those ideas of things coming out of earth, things coming out of God, things deriving from it, all of those things, those ideas, they fade, even for like the lowest Sotapanna. So fundamentally, even if they're very well developed in concentration, in virtue, and even have relative like wisdom in regards to seeing that like parts of your experience are not self, as Meister Eckhart saw with all of his ideas of detachment, there is still self-view to some extent. So like the idea of perennialism, the idea that like all the different religions are sort of have the same truth, it's not necessarily true, to be honest, because dependent origination is a unique doctrine to Buddhism, and it kind of goes back to what we talked about in these Q&As, which is the difference between uprooting suffering and reducing suffering. It's a very subtle difference, but it's a very big thing, basically. And that's basically the difference between not only Maitreya and the Buddha, but also between the Buddha and someone like Bahia, who did develop all the jhanas and was just missing that one specific piece of knowledge. So, yeah, I would just stick to, I mean, if you want a right view, as the Buddha talked about it, if you want the cessation of suffering, as the Buddha talked about it, I would stick to the suttas, really. Yeah.
And even in the suttas, the Buddha specifically said at some point, and I'm sorry if I cannot give you a number because we do those things here very spontaneously. He specifically said that there is one thing that is special to the teaching of the Buddha, and that is the teaching on dependent origination. Nothing else. There were Brahmins practicing the Brahma-viharas. There were ascetics practicing the jhanas. There were his prior teachers who were practicing the formless realms and everything like that. And there are likely also other people who were practicing divine abodes and whatever. But they all lacked that one thing, the understanding of dependent origination. They lacked the right view, they lacked wisdom. That's kind of it. And in that sense, Buddhism is unique. And it should also tell you why it's difficult. So you could come to the conclusion that all those religions are rather the same and they only have to do certain things. But it's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do. It might be simple. You can formulate it in quite a short way, but that does not mean that you can just put it into practice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything you want to add?
I guess just extending on what you were saying there, I think a lot of people could think like, why is it so hard to get the right view in Buddhism? Especially when there's all these different teachers that teach different things and so on. Well, that's sort of exactly it, right? There's the special teaching, especially for the Buddhas, is extremely, extremely subtle. And the Buddha even said that, like when you're measuring a teacher's worth, well, first of all, you see whether they're, based in lust, aversion, delusion, whether they have improper conduct. But then you'd say, like, measure, is what they're saying, this person's saying, is it deep? Is it subtle? Is it profound? Is it hard to measure? If it is, well, there's at least more of a chance that it's towards what the Buddha is saying, because it is subtle. It's not a mundane thing. It's not like a trick of the mind. It is a supra mundane knowledge. Yeah.
It is indeed. Yeah. Okay, anyway, for this video, we are approaching the ending of the recording time. We usually only do about half an hour to 40 minutes, and we are close to half an hour now. So I would say it's a good time to stop today. And yeah, thank you all very much for watching this video. If you have additional questions, feel free to put them down below. If you wish, join the Dhamma Hub community. And apart from that, I wish you a pleasant day, and until next time. Goodbye.